And maybe before we move on, could you explain in layman terms for non-cyber brains like myself, like what is did you call it spearfishing?
Yeah, sure.
Because,
Spearfishing
and
is
hold on one
just
second, because and maybe you can tell me my only awareness of what hacking was in university. We found something that it was like you attached this piece of software to a photo, and we sent it
mhm.
to a friend, and the friend clicked on it to open it. It was just like us being stupid. It was like a university photo, but after they clicked on it, it would install. It was an exe file, so it would install on their PC, and then we could see what they were typing into their computer.
Yeah.
And so it was just one of our friends, and we I think took over one of his accounts and freaked him out. But that's the only experience I've ever had with hacking. And so I wonder, like, how much more advanced is like because you always see, like, you and I have joked about the movies where someone's just typing on a keyboard like this, and that's how they get in. But functionally, I have no idea how it actually works to be able to get access to someone's system.
Yeah, so I mean it's divided into full life cycle. So like when you do incident response, which is responding to, like, a hacking operation. And by the way, part of the reason that the DNC like called us was they were actually nervous about having the FBI, of course, offered their services, but they were nervous about it being too political. And now that there's all this stuff going on with the FBI and Trump, you can see why they decided to hire an outside service. I think that was one of the big things the
Wow.
QAnon folks were like, why did they hire CrowdStrike? I was like, because if it was the Bureau, it still would have been a huge political thing of like, the Bureau's ganging up on this and all. So there are times where a third party is beneficial to have be brought in because they're supposed to be as impartial as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, spearfishing is basically just like the first initial intrusion. Like, typically before you carry out a hacking operation, before you ever send anything to anyone, there's a reconnaissance period where you're trying to figure out, like, okay, if you're my target, Mike, I'm going to try and do as much open source research about you, figure out some of your habits, where you frequent, maybe what email you would trust to see, coming from. So if I know that you're a member of this health club, I might, try and spoof my email to be, coming from this health club. So it looks like it's one of these things just saying like, hey, Mike, we didn't actually get your payment for your last month's membership. And then you're going to click a link in that email. And that is the spearfishing email. The link in there directs you to a site that will silently in the background download some sort of tool. And then that tool sometimes can be really simple, or really complex. Like, it sounds like what you were talking about was an actual remote access tool, which there's plenty of good uses for it. If you've ever worked at a big company and, your IT staff needs to come on and fix something for you, they're using technically a legal remote access tool to take control of your
Right.
computer
No, we
remotely.
couldn't get access to the computer. We could just see what they
Mhm.
were typing on their keyboard. So we could see
Got
if
it.
someone put, like,
Oh, okay. So you
Johnny
got a
Blaze at
keylogger.
yahoo.com. Keylogger.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, so and keyloggers sometimes are a really good way to just like collect. So if a rat or a remote access tool is too noisy sometimes, and antivirus software and things like that are going to look for those specific things. Sometimes a keylogger can be, just it's a few megabytes or something really small on your
Mm.
computer that you're not going to notice in the background, but they'll collect a whole bunch of your passwords. Then they've got access to a bunch of your accounts. And then from there,
Wow.
they can kind of gain different access to your other accounts or your networks. And that's called lateral movement. So there's
Hmm.
that's part of the life cycle of carrying out a cyber intrusion. And then once you have, something like admin access, that's to where you can actually make, read, write, edit files, send things. You can basically, package up the intelligence you've collected or anything about it, and then kind of exfiltrate that to a server somewhere that they can download. So
Wow. And so how would people like me protect themselves from any sort of, like, these links? Like, even if there's like, say, an email that comes in from something that I may or may not know is a valid source, but I want to click it just for fun to see where it goes. Like, I have a Mac, which I think is less likely to be hacked than a PC traditionally. But if I were to click it and go to the site, like, can I know that something wasn't executed on my system so that it's either key logging or getting access to other files? Like how can I even know?
Sure. So I mean, the entry level, of course, is just having some sort of basic antivirus. But I will say that antivirus is kind of a little bit outdated. It's whitelisting and blacklisting things. So it makes a list of sites and things that have been deemed malicious and blocks you from going to those, etc.
Right.
But the issue with that is it constantly has to be updated. And so the newer version of that is kind of like cloud protection services, which is something CrowdStrike offers, where you have a client on your computer that basically is checking for those things actively all the time.
Okay.
So of course those are mostly going to be paid or sometimes freemium options. But the other stuff is just kind of like there's some things that you can download, like I think it's called, is it My Little Spy or My Little Helper or something like that? That's like basically it can be super noisy if you don't set it up right, because it's telling you every time something is trying to like do a specific type of GET request or pull something from your computer.
Right.
So it takes a couple of weeks for you to set the filters correctly so that you're not just getting pings for run of the day stuff. But there's some great tools out there that you can just kind of download that are open source that'll tell you if something is doing something like that. The other thing you can do is always just like, I mean, I always tell people just like hover over the link and see whether it actually directs you. In the little bottom left-hand corner, there's usually, if you hover over it, it's going to tell you
Yeah.
what site it's going to take you to.
Okay.
But then sometimes you're still not sure. So take the URL and go to some place like my site my buddy stood up is called urlscan.io. And that
Okay.
one's great because you can just kind of paste the URL in there and just see like, hey, is this malicious? Has it ever been malicious? You can even see a
Cool.
brief, it automates it. So that it'll take a screenshot and show you like, hey, this is the site you're about to visit. You still want to kind of like do this. So there's some cool tools out there that you can use. And then there's a ton of courses, I think, on Coursera and edX and all of these other free things that basically teach you up to date techniques for like how to stay on top of spearfishing. But